So I believe I am streaming on, well, it says I'm streaming on Twitch. It looks like it's going to take a while to get to YouTube. I'm not sure why it's not working on YouTube. Let me just redo that. All right, give me 10 seconds to get everything. And we are back. Alrighty. So let us begin. So where we last left off, we were working with these bouncy balls, and we had just made this simulation here with these bouncy balls, and we had just fixed a glitch where the balls were gaining or losing energy depending on when they depending on how we do these calculations, and we realized that by splitting the change in y velocity from gravity across the two parts of the instruction, we could we could get rid of that problem. Now, I gave a fairly bare bones explanation and pointed people to a video last time, but I think if I get a bit of paint out, I think I have a better explanation, or at least I can try and just recreate the explanation from that video. Even though that video is more about frame rates and stuff, I still think it's kind of similar. The same sort of just applies. There's two. Really, the biggest issue is simply that the the way that the velocity changes over time, and technically there is a small frame rate dependence on this, even without the bouncing. And also which depends on whether technically, if we don't split it up like I've split up here above and below the velocity sections, there is a small dependence on frame rate, and that dependence also changes depending on whether or not we put all 0.4 velocity changes, the whole 0.4 velocity change, either before or after the position changes. So it does have a dependency there. But it's really wasn't that big of a deal and wasn't noticeable. However, problems with this setup did become noticeable once we started. When it comes to problems with this setup, do become noticeable pretty quickly once you have some bouncing involved, because of the way that this interacts with velocity changes. So let's just look at how this works without bouncing. So let's say I have let's just start with no bouncing and no gravity. So you have a single velocity throughout the entire stream. So let's just draw a quick graph. Let's imagine this is my vertical axis here, right? And this is my horizontal axis. right? And my vertical axis represents velocity, and my horizontal axis represents time. So here is my velocity. Oh, that's very big. Just a second, let's make that text smaller. This is my y velocity, and this other one is time. All right, just a second. So anyway, as I was saying, so we know from from basic physics and calculus that the distance traveled over a period of time between 2 points is going to be the area under this velocity curve. And when the velocity is a straight line, in other words, when the velocity is constant, it doesn't change. This is pretty simple because the area of this rectangle is the area of this rectangle is simply going to be the um, the the current velocity multiplied by the change in time, and we'll call the change in time, by the way, is the delta time. I don't really have a delta symbol. I don't really need to use a proper delta symbol, so I'll just use a little dt, and dt is the little chunks of time. So each one of these chunks of time is a dt. Now in my program, there's no explicit dt that I've declared. I'm just it's technically effectively a value of 1. But the important thing is the way we're changing position and the way we are the way we're changing position, the way we're changing velocity each frame. So this is our, like, let's say this black here represents our true velocity, or like the velocity of like an actual object, that if this represented an actual object that was under constant gravitation, or in this case not being accelerated at all. Sorry, imagine if the black line I've drawn here represents uh, the velocity of a real object, then let's say blue represents the velocity each frame as calculated by our program. Now at the moment there'll be no difference, so I'm not actually going to bother. So I could color this blue just to represent that they're the same, they overlap, but I'm just going to leave it alone for the time being. And we're going to focus on the calculations that happen under the hood. So if you imagine, let's say this dashed line, let's get a, how do we make a dashed line? I'm not quite sure. Anyway, the point is, the way we currently have it, sorry, I don't know, I'm going in circles, sorry. Okay, the point is that currently every frame we increase the y position by the current y velocity. So let's say the current y velocity is 1, then we would, so, and the dt is 1, then that means if we start at time 0 at position 0, then after 1, then on the next frame we'll increase the position to, let's use light blue to represent our position. So we'll start at 0, and after 1 frame we'll go to 1, then after 2 frames we will, at the end of this, and then on the next frame we'll go to 2, and on the next frame we'll go to 3, and so on. Now if we compare that to our actual velocity, like let's use this darker blue to represent the actual velocity of this object if it were a real object, according to physics and calculus, right? So according to physics and calculus, if I have an object that is at a constant speed, then its position over time will be a linear function. So obviously it starts at 0, and then using calculus, the area under this curve after 1 second or after 1 time unit will be exactly the y velocity, but in terms of distance instead of time. Or in the metric system, I would use, in terms of meters instead of meters per second, or kilometers instead of kilometers per hour, if the time unit was an hour, for example. And in the American system, I guess feet per second would be changed into feet, or miles per hour would be changed into miles. You get it. And actually, this straight line would continue the whole time, so it would actually look a bit more like this, so a bit steeper than I have it because I haven't actually drawn this to scale, but you get the general gist. So actually, this little blue line would actually go up here, and then all of this would actually be non-existent, so to speak. But that's the basic gist, and you can see that at the end of every frame, it matches perfectly, so there's no problem. Now, the real problem comes. The real problem comes when, let's just straighten this line out. Perfect. All right, almost perfect. Good enough. There's still a little kink in the middle. The real issue comes when the velocity starts to change over time. So let's just, oh my gosh. All right, I know what to do. Let's get rid of this straight velocity line and let's get a new one representing some type of acceleration or deceleration. To make it simple, let's say it's a deceleration. Starting at a high speed, oh my gosh, let's say we're starting at a relatively higher speed and then ending up at a lower speed, maybe by this time. Then the area under the curve is going to, over each segment of time, is going to decrease, and so will the distance moved. So this is going to have is going to look like a parabola. So if we just draw this out, you can imagine at the beginning, if it starts at position 0 and is heading upwards, it's going to head upwards relatively steeply. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. I don't know what I just did there. Oh my gosh, it's so hard to draw. I don't know what I'm doing. Oh my god. All right, let's try and get a good brush. How about this? Does this work? All right, good enough. All right, so sort of draw a parabola, right? You can imagine it sort of flattens off and then goes down. So it's, I guess if I had the proper mouse that I have, I'd be able to draw this better. But the point is that it's a parabola and it sort of curves like that. Anyway, how does the program calculate it? Well, the way the program calculates it is dependent on the order in which we run the calculations. Because first we need to change the y velocity and then we need to update the position. And in short, you can imagine if we update the y velocity to decrease it every time, in other words, if our velocity looks like this so that we decrease it, if we update y velocity at the end, if we at the end of each frame decrease the y velocity and then multiply the new y velocity and then add the new y velocity to our object, then it would be as if we were decreasing then it would be as if we were getting the area under this curve. You can see if we try to calculate the area under this curve where I've got, blue and then I'm decreasing things over time. Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. I'm being silly. I should be lining this up this way and then drawing backwards like that. That's how I need to do this. Yeah. And so you can imagine to calculate the area under this curve, you take the previous position, you decrease it, you look at the current position, you look at the new velocity for your current position is this velocity here, And since you use that new velocity, you get the area under the curve like so, and you slightly underestimate the position. You slightly underestimate the velocity, right? Or if this was, and likewise, if this was an increasing curve, you would also underestimate the velocity. So in either way, you're going to underestimate the speed regardless of which direction the velocity is going or whether the velocity is increasing or decreasing. You're going to miss the upper half of each of these triangles. On the other hand, if you perform the velocity calculation first, which I'll represent with this with a purple, then actually maybe we need something more like blue or like red to differentiate. Then we would have something more like this, where you change on the once you get one frame ahead. On each frame, you're going to first apply the velocity value of the previous position to the current. You're going to apply the velocity value of the previous frame to the current frame, right? And then you're going to change the y velocity to the new one. And that's going to result in the equivalent of calculating this upper area here, right? And, that's going to overestimate the speed. I'm not taking as much time to draw this carefully, but you get it. They're supposed to be straight lines. You get the gist. They're rectangles. It's an upper and lower. These are the lower and upper parts of rectangles, right? So if you get the area under the red curve, it's going to be larger than what the actual velocity would be for a real object that had this y velocity at each of these individual times, assuming, of course, that that the velocity profile was linear. In other words, that it changed over time like a line, as I've drawn this black line here. And luckily there is a really easy way to sort of do this, and that is that you can just take it turns out if you take the average of these two rectangles, the upper area under the curve and the lower area under the curve, when you calculate, by rectangle I mean each individual set of rectangles like this. So this is I mean the area within this blue rectangle here and the area underneath this red rectangle here. All of that. So if you take the average between the blue area and the red area, you'll actually get the proper area, which I'll mark in purple, that you want, which is this, right? That's the area under the curve that you want, ideally, right? And we actually end up achieving this in our system by simply moving the velocity halfway, changing the gravity velocity halfway, then applying the speed, and then changing it the rest of the way. And this gives you this sort of zigzag where you first, which is the equivalent of calculating this area under this purple curve here, right? Because if I do that, you can tell each frame, we only move down half of what we would have. With the red one, we don't move at all. We move all of it at the end. With the blue one, we move all of it at the beginning. With the purple curve, we move half of it and then the other half of it, like so. And the good thing about this curve is that, just give me a second, I'm trying Let me get this right. I know I'm being a bit pedantic, but right, there we go. Jeez. So anyway, the good thing about this is that now if we just look at the area under the purple curve, new purple curve, it's actually the exact same area that we would have had if we went under the black curve. And the reason is because any part that's missing from this triangle here, that I've colored in gray, goes to this triangle, which I can't actually do because this triangle here that I've now colored in gray. So that's how we can smooth out a linear change over time. However, of course, when we actually do our program, we're not just applying gravity over time, we are also applying a bounce. So let's look at the negative section. Let's add a negative section to this graph. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this section and drag it up. And now this is going in the middle. So now we'll say this position here is our 0. I'll just leave that implied, honestly. So now, let's say we are falling. So our y velocity is negative and increasingly negative. And then we hit the ground and we bounce back up, right? So now our y velocity is positive. And then because we're under the influence of gravity, it begins to decrease again until we hit the ground again. But we're just going to focus on the first part of this graph for the time being. Let's just stretch this out. So let's say we start with a velocity of 0, we hit the ground, we bounce, and then it takes us another 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds to reach back up. So what this would represent is something that looks a bit more, oh my gosh, where's my mouse? Yeah, so this would represent, oh my gosh, sorry, just a second. Got to redraw this. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. There we go. Let's change. Let's click. There we go. So what this would represent is you start up in the air, let's say, with a position, with a velocity that's 0, so you're relatively straight. You start to go towards the ground. All of a sudden, you hit the ground, and then you bounce back. Now your velocity is positive until you finally get to 0. And I've just realized these little zigzag things actually got to do with the way the mouse pad interacts with my hand. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, the point is you go down, then you go back up. But what does this actually look like in terms of, when we do our calculations? Well, you can see if we do our original calculation, right? Remember when we do our, the way we originally did it, we would change the velocity first. No, the way we originally did it is actually the red one, the red curve, where we change the position first, then do the velocity, which gives us a curve that looks something like this, right? So it has these red triangles that are, oh, I see I've made a mistake. So earlier, I told you guys that it doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative or what direction it's going. I'm going to clarify that. I was wrong. It does matter whether it's positive or negative. It doesn't matter which direction it's going, but it does matter whether it's positive or negative. If it's negative, then the red line will actually, then in this case, wait, let me think about this. All right, no, I'm completely wrong. I'm so sorry. I was completely wrong there. What I should have said is if you are decreasing in velocity and you're currently positive, then the red line will give you more speed and the blue line will give you less speed. Yes, that is correct. However, if you are positive velocity and if you have positive velocity and position, then it will be the other way around. Basically, the red line will lag. No, the blue line will lag. No, the red line will lag and use the previous velocity. So if if your speed is getting smaller over time, for example, if you're positive and if you have a positive position if you have a positive velocity and it's decreasing, that's what I meant to say, a positive velocity that's decreasing. All right, let's get this all clarified. Let's just get this over with. All right. Let's just get this over with and really clarify. If you have a positive velocity that is increasing, then your red, then updating let's do this. Okay. If you have a positive velocity that is increasing over time, the red one, the red line that I'm about to draw here, represents changing the velocity, represents waiting and then changing the velocity afterwards. If you change the position first and then change the velocity afterwards, then it will lag behind and use the velocity calculated at the end of the previous frame. This will result in it being slower than it otherwise would be because the velocity is increasing over time. It's already positive, and you're using outdated velocity values that are slower than it would have otherwise been. Since the speed is increasing over time and you're using outdated values, then it will be slower. The same is true if you have a negative speed and the speed itself is decreasing, because again, you calculate the new position, then you update the velocity, which means you again use the previous frame's velocity value, and once again you get this smaller area under the curve, this area here, this red area here, as opposed to all of this, right? You underestimate the area. On the other hand, if you have a positive velocity, but that velocity is decreasing, then let's start that again. If you have a positive velocity and that velocity is decreasing over time, then using the red line technique, in other words, let's start again. I've got to get this good. If you have a positive velocity that is decreasing over time, then applying the velocity to the position first and then updating the velocity will result in a larger area under the curve and thus a faster positive speed, because you're using outdated values. And since the values are decreasing over time, those outdated values will be faster. And likewise, one last thing, if you have a negative velocity and your velocity is increasing, in other words, becoming more positive, then you will also have a larger area, and this time a larger negative area, or I guess technically a smaller area, if you count the negative values like that. But in terms of absolute value, your speed is going to be larger because, again, you're going to be using outdated values. And since these values are getting closer to zero over time, you're going to be using more negative, you're going to be using outdated values that are larger in the negative direction than they otherwise would be. And so you will have a faster downward speed. That covers all four cases. In other words, if the velocity is increasing, if the change in velocity is in the same direction as its current sign, in other words, if it's positive and it's getting more positive, or it's negative and getting less negative, then using red will make it slower than using the previous frame's velocity, then updating the velocity after you've moved the object will result in the object moving slower than it otherwise would, while doing the opposite would result in the opposite. And likewise, if the derivative or change in the velocity over time and the velocity itself have opposite sign, in other words, if you have a positive velocity which is decreasing over time, or you have a negative velocity that is increasing or becoming more positive over time, then the opposite of everything I just said is true. Updating the object's position first, then changing the velocity afterwards will result in faster objects than you would otherwise have, whereas doing the opposite, changing the velocity first, then moving it, would result in smaller ones. So that's like 2 by 2 by 2 grid there. That's 8 different possibilities. It's not really important though, I guess, technically, to go through all of that because, to be honest, once you use the purple, it all works out. So that is that. Now, the other part of this scenario is the change in velocity at the point of the bounce. So we can say if we were using the red technique, in other words, the update position first, then update velocity technique, then at first our ball is slower than you would otherwise think, right? Then, upon going up, our new velocity is now larger than you would think. In other words, the ball will, on average, travel up more than it traveled down, which will increase its velocity. Will increase the total height that it reaches, and therefore increase the energy of the ball. And this pattern will continue because once you eventually reach, once the ball starts traveling downwards, all of a sudden this relationship will reverse. And now that you are going down, the ball will travel downwards more slowly than it otherwise would. Now, these differences in speed are imperceptible at first, but they become really obvious once the ball starts gaining height. Because the big problem with it going slower downwards than it goes upwards, right? Apart from the fact that because the real problem with it going downwards slower than it goes upwards is that it's going to over this, it's going. Let's draw the actual curve out that this would be. So our actual position is going to move in jumps according to our y velocity. So first we're not going to move, then we're going to move a bit, then we're going to move twice as far, then we're going to move 3 times as far, and then let's say we get to 0. Remember, we're moving, then updating the velocity. So we're moving. So actually, I think it would be better to say you do this, you move down a bit, update your velocity. This is the moving part. Wait, I'm confused. We move, then we update. So we moved nowhere, we update our velocity, go to the next section. We move down a bit, then we update the velocity. We move down a bit more, then we update the velocity. And finally, we move down a lot, and we update the velocity. Okay, so I had it right the first time, basically. Basically, I had it kind of right the first time. We're doubling each time, sort of, roughly. 1, 2, yeah, there we go. Then on the next frame, now we do a calculation. First we move. We would move downwards. So we're actually going to be at a negative. We're actually going to be moving downwards this negative distance here for about 1 frame, let's say, right? Then we're going to update the velocity, which is going to be negative. And then let me think. Then we're going to update the velocity to be negative. Yes. And then we're going to flip it, which is going to bring it up to here. Right? Okay. And that, of course, I'm sorry, and then, sorry, we're going to go down, then we're going to update the velocity to be down and then up here. On the next frame, we're going to move up by this new velocity. The velocity calculated by, yeah, sure, whatever, it's fine. The area under this curve, right? We're following the area under the curve, so we're going back up plus a little extra, right? All right, I feel like I'm losing the plot a bit here. I don't like funny because I'm actually plotting a curve. I feel like maybe this isn't the best way to. I'm sure that there's a way to combine the two explanations, but basically you have a speed, you're going down, you're supposed to have the same speed going down as going up. But if you increase the speed downwards, if you are increasing your speed, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, by 1 every second, then when it goes to 4, all of a sudden you hit it. Let's say you go 1, 2, 3, 4, then on the next frame, you increase it to 5, you move the ball, increase it to 5, realize you've hit the ball, hit the ground, and then change it to be pointing upwards by 5, and then on the next frame move upwards by 5 and then decrease by 4. Now you moved down 1 frame by 4 and the next frame up by 5, and then up by 4, and then up by 3, and then up by 2, and then up by 1. So if we add those up, we go 1, we'll start by not moving at all, right? You moved by 0, you move down by 1, you move down by 2, and then you move down by 3, 1, 1, 2, 3 points. Then you bounce. So then the velocity goes, you move down by 3, then you're supposed to move down by 4, but your velocity bounces, and so it goes, and you actually move up by -4, by +4, which means you end up at this position instead, equal to here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 points up, right? It's actually pretty good, actually. I think this is a good explanation. I think we'll be able to combine the two explanations by the end of this. Hopefully it all works out. So you'll end up at this point here, right? Then on the next frame, your velocity will go down from 4 to 3, and you'll move up by 3 points. So 1, you'll move up by, you've moved down by 1, 2, 3, so you move 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you'll go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, so you'll move up to here. And then you'll move up by 2, 1, 2. Then you'll move up by 1, and then you'll move up by 0, and you'll reach your new bounce height. So if your previous bounce height was some number x, then your new bounce height is going to be bigger than x, because you're going to go down by 1, then by 2, then by 3. So you're going to go down to x minus 6. Then you're going to go up from x minus 6. You're going to go up by 4. You're going to go up by 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. And 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 is 10. So your difference is going to be plus 10 minus 6, which is a difference of 4. So you're actually going to end up 4 units above where you started. And that is obviously not good, because it means you've gained energy. Now let's take a look at the actual velocity calculations over time, just so I get everything straight. This is what you would move at the end of the frame. In other words, using the new velocity. So let's say you start off with a velocity of some number. Since we move first, then change the velocity, that means that our velocity, we're going to want to use the previous velocity. So if the previous velocity was 0, then we're using this red curve, and we're saying it's 0. We're going to move across by 0, and then we're going to decrease it. So let's just put a black line here to represent the 0 of our velocities. We start with a velocity of 0. Oh my gosh, I guess we're using a grey line. I'm not really sure. We'll use a grey line. Well, no, we'll use this black line. We'll use this black line. It's fine. Red will represent the original technique we use for moving, which is to move first, update second. So first we move across by 0, which means we use a velocity of 0, and the area under this curve should be 0. Then we get a slight negative velocity. On the next frame, we decrease our velocity again by 1. And lastly, on this frame, lastly after the third frame, wait, hang on, 1, 2, 3, This is the movement from the previous. I see. So the area under here represents the next movement. And then finally we go down by 3. So the area under this curve is applied from here to here. Then on the next one, we would go down by 4, but instead we go up by 4. So that gives us that. So that gives us this situation where we go up by 3 and then up by 4. Then obviously we go down to 3, down to 2, down to 1, and then back to 0. And it's clear that the area under this curve, as I said before, is going to be positive, right? Oh my gosh, what's going on here? It's so hard to do live. I guess if I had a mouse, it would be a bit better, but I'm fine like this, honestly. So, as you can see, obviously the area under the curve is going to be a little bit lower, a little bit higher, a little bit more positive than it is negative. Again, representing the fact that it's moving up faster than it is moving down. This also means it takes, as I was, if we then do the next few frames, right, we can see that since the it's now higher, it has a velocity of 4 more than it did before, it will actually take longer for it to get back to the ground than it did the first time. So yeah, really the biggest difference is just this, is just the fact that it starts with a 1 bit higher velocity, whereas if it was exactly getting the same velocity out than it had come in, then it would actually be this red bit here. So it's this square, this square, this square, and this square that are responsible for the extra 4 steps, right? Anyway, if we were to instead apply the other technique, let's say we used light blue, and that means to update the velocity first and then use it, then instead the area under the curve that we're using would look like this. We'd have this blue, we'd go down by, let's just use green to represent that. We would decrease it by 1, then go. So we would go down by 1, then we would go down by 2, then we would go down by 3, then we would what happens? We update the velocity, then the position. Right. I see. So we would change the velocity to be negative, then we would move it. Then we would change the velocity to be negative 4. Realize, then move it, I suppose. We do the velocity change first, then we move, then we check. So we could check after, but I guess we would actually move it. Like if this, because with this, well, hang on. We're assuming that x minus 6 is below the ground. So we would move down by 3, then we would change, we would move down by 3 points. 1, 2, 3 of position. Then our velocity, then we would realize we were in the floor and we would bounce and we would go to positive 3 points of velocity, which we would then use next frame. So on the next frame, we'll change the velocity to from positive 3 to positive 2 and then use that. Right? So using that, we can also draw our other graph. We go down, we go down, we go down, and then on this frame, we realize we're in the ground, and so before we start at -3, we realize we're in the ground, we go to +3, but then, which would be here, but then of course when we actually bounce, when we actually calculate the new velocity on the next frame, we undercalculate it and we go to +2. So we end up using the area under this green curve here, which is a little less than we would otherwise expect. And I've just realized that this, this position is 2 underneath at this point, which is correct. This looks like it's 1 above, 2 above the black or 1 below the black. It's actually not. It's actually flush with the black because we're using the rightmost side. We're using the rightmost side of the green line and the left side of the black line in terms of like the depth of the well, so to speak. I don't really know if what I just said there makes sense, but that's how it is. So then on the next frame, we move right by 1 and then we move right by 0. And so we only move 1 bit up. And then the next frame, we don't move at all. 1 point up. And so in this one, we actually end up only 1, 2, 3 points above 6. Above x minus 6, we only end up at x. So we end up at x minus 3. So one way we gained 4 points of height, and the other way we lost 3 points of height. And that, in physics, the height that you would reach after bouncing, or the height of the projectile before falling, is going to be directly proportional to the potential energy of the object, and therefore to the amount of kinetic energy that it is going to gain by falling from that height down to ground. And so we've essentially shown that by using each of these 2 simulation techniques, we would either gain or lose height and therefore energy and therefore speed every time it bounces because of the way our calculations are done. And the reason this happens is for exactly the reason I said before earlier, where it's either over or underestimating the speed at each time when we do it, right? But like before, if we change the speed by half, then move the object, then update the other half of the speed, we end up taking a middle ground approach, which approaches the actual true value of the line. So let's take a look at what that looks like using this purple line. So we can see that this black and purple line. So we can see, obviously, we get half of this. So we move half, then we would move 1.5, then we would move 2.5. In this one, our average is, we're going to move 2.5, which would bring us from 1 down to 3 down to x minus, well, we would decrease by 1. We would decrease the thing by half, so we would end up at the halfway point here. Then we would go down by 1.5, so we would end up here. Then we would go down by 2.5, right? So we go half, 1, 2, so we would end up here. Now, this is where it gets sort of interesting. It really depends what happens next, whether we bounce or not. If we don't bounce, we'll continue to go down. If we do bounce, we'll continue to go up. So let's consider both scenarios. Let's say that the game doesn't consider x minus, let's see, we've gone down a half, plus 1.5, which is down by 2. Oh, I see. We've done this wrong. I need to go down. We've gone down to 2. Now we need to go down 2.5. So this is 1, 2, 2.5. So we actually go here. Now on the next frame, whether or not we bounce depends on whether or not x minus 4.5 counts as in the floor or not. We're going to say, since that probably wouldn't count, where then it would actually fall a bit more. It would, let's see, then our velocity would go down to from 0.5 to 1.5 to 2.5 down to 3.5. Alternatively, our velocity could, if it was considered part of it, then, well, we'll see what happens. We'll see. If we did bounce right now, then what would happen is we would first move it by half down to 4, move across, then increase to there, and then bounce, leaving us here, right? Leaving us, yeah, I don't know, man. The point is that for the same reasons I explained earlier, the two effects would cancel out. And yeah, and maybe I'll save this so that I can half explained. Maybe I'll try and continue this explanation on the next stream or something, or later on. But for the time being, I think you get the gist. I think I've over-explained. Oh. Hello, Dilshan. Wait, when did this happen? 1:15. Hi, Dilshan. Yeah, it's good to see you. I guess if you're the only one on stream, I can talk directly to you, eh? Yeah. I mean, this is going to be recorded, but I guess as long as I don't say anything silly, it should be fine. I'm trying to do some live streaming. Because I've actually tried to do this a couple times, recording like games and stuff. I mean, I talked about it in the last one. Are you also not in Australia? I know Quok went to Pennsylvania. I see. Anyway, yeah, I tried a long time to about a year ago I tried to do like a recording of like Mega Man or something to try and do a Let's Play series. Yeah, it's really delayed. But you know what's even more delayed is this restream thing here showing ages ago, and I don't know why it does that. Because if I look at my actual screen, if I look at the actual like YouTube, it's not that delayed. It just showed me going over here now. And if I look at my the Twitch, wait, is the Twitch online or offline? I'm really confused. I hope it's not offline on Twitch. Not that anyone's watching, but But for some reason, yeah, it's just showing me checking Twitch now. So yeah, for some reason, it does that. I'm not really sure why. But yeah, I was gonna do that last year, and I chickened out. I was like, I'm not ready. I can't do this. And so this year, this time round, I'm doing my best. It's been really stressful for reasons that I guess I can get into because I was going to talk about it on stream eventually anyway. I might as well talk about it. You on stream? Um, uh, I figured, if the problem is I kept recording myself and then not uploading it because I didn't care anymore, Um, and I figure if I stream instead, then it's sort of opposite, right? Like if you record a video, then the default is to not upload it, and the choice is to upload it. But if you have a live stream, then the default is to keep it up, and the action is to get rid of it. So if you live stream, then by default, you make the easier option to keep the stream up. Now it's showing it in real time. I'm really confused. Also, for some reason, it's showing this like branding here and it says remove branding. But when I actually look at the stream on Twitch and YouTube, there is no branding there. So that's glitched out. I probably shouldn't let them know that. They must have screwed that up when they updated the logo to look like the Ukrainian flag colors, I guess. I'm not really sure. But yeah, yeah, you don't see it. That's what I mean. You don't see it on YouTube or Twitch. You can only see it on my end. Anyway, this is okay. It would probably be better if I used Streamlabs or if I found a way to get OBS to do multi-streaming to different keys, but this is a good beginner solution. I just stream to here and then it streams to YouTube and Twitch for me. That way I can be on both. Yeah. So I'm not really sure what to do because I could head back to uni um, next semester, potentially, to try and finish my degree finally. What is it? 2016, 8 years into my 5-year degree, as they say. It's like the Wally scene. Um, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to try and make videos about other stuff. I wanted to try and, well, do this basically, right? Make videos about this, try and make projects. And then, is this engineering? I mean, not really. This is just regular coding. I'm trying to make a simulation. This is literally the first one. This is something I wanted to do for a long time. Like, since we were in high school, basically. I'm very slow. Well, maybe not this one particular. I'm not really sure exactly. I've had this particular idea, but yeah, I've always wanted to do a thing on like how to do simulations, how to do finite difference techniques and do that and try and build from there and eventually get to the point where I can do this, show how to do the Schrodinger equation and stuff. I wanted to. It was difficult to find a good way to both make it an out. Both. I felt I talked about it last time, although with a lot of OCD. But basically, it was kind of hard to figure out exactly how to do it. Um, and so I just thought, because part of the issue is it would be much easier if I didn't feel this need to like just to show it off. If I just did the projects, I'd probably be through most of them by now, and then I could worry about sharing them or documenting them afterwards. But for some reason, I was like, I want to try and do tutorials and stuff. It was a long time ago. It's I'm confused. It doesn't matter. Anyway, point is, if I do this live stream, I thought recently, forget it. I'm just going to try and make some videos. I changed the idea to live streaming at the end of it, but the original idea was, all right, I'm just going to make some videos. I'm going to try and do a project a day. I'm going to try and record a video. I mean, project a day is a bit, over ambitious, maybe more like a per week. I don't know exactly know. Try and record a video on it and try and build that up to the point where I then feel comfortable doing it more and more and more. I'm not really sure. I guess try and build up confidence making videos on YouTube and stuff. They always say you just got to do it, and you're going to start off bad. Your quality will improve over time. And it's always been tough for me because I want to try and make it as good as possible from the get go. I want to try and make it a good series. But I know that it's not really going to be a good series because kind of like not that well thought out. Because if I'm trying to both do like entertaining one and a tutorial. And if I do a tutorial and I show every little bit, it's not going to be that entertaining. It's going to be more on the educational side. On the other hand, if I do something that's more well edited and shows things, using a whiteboard and stuff, then, it might not necessarily be so, it's not going to show every little detail, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not, but anyway, I talked about this last time. Just give me a second. Point is, I've been trying to figure this out for a while now, and recently, about last year, I was going to try and enter the 3 Blue 1 Brown competition, the Summer of Math Exposition thing, because I realized that I might have proven a result in knot theory, an unproven result. So after a lot of time, I managed to get past the OCD and write a script and stuff. But I managed to write that script, I finished writing that script I finally got past all that OCD and managed to start writing the script maybe a week before the end of it, or 2 weeks, but then it took a long time to get back into it. I'm not really sure. It took a while. And so then I ended up finishing it, the script itself, like a day before, or 2 days before, 3 days before. And then I had to try and do the next part of it, which was to write all the slides. And by slides, I mean I was going to do mock slides on a piece of paper, not PowerPoint, but what I was going to do is I was going to try and make a video where I drew things on the whiteboard and then I edited it to make it look like I drew it far, speed myself up and essentially try and do a bit of creative thing with just fast moving, using the whiteboard instead of an actual computer. I thought it would be quicker in the long run than trying to animate things, but would still look nice. So I bought a whiteboard, bought a tripod, I got everything set up, but then I wasn't able to get all that stuff done, because by the time I was actually doing it, it was the day of the competition, and I had just finished writing the script, or I had just finished moving on to the next part, which was to try and draw out the slides and try and record just the first bit. And it was in the middle of it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I knew that the competition ended at 7 in the morning. Australian time, and I didn't think I was going to get it. And so I sort of just stopped there, and I could have kept trying to work on it afterwards, but I just kind of gave up for the time being. I told myself I'll work on it later. I said I need a break. I really pushed myself, you know. Um, I'm glad I got past my anxieties and OCDs and got myself to work on something. But I'm gonna take a bit of a break for now, and that would have been it. I spent the next bit trying to just think, trying to eventually get myself to work on it again. Uh, but then I started to get really stressed out and stuff. Because as it turns out, the things that I am very interested in, people really don't like. I mean, some people, I don't know if you're gonna understand what I mean. I assume maybe you will. Some people understand straight away. Some people I have to talk more about it. But basically, I'm really interested in robotics and automation and AI, and turns out people really don't like that. I mean, they don't like it as it's being done by tech companies at the moment, right? I do think there are ways to make it more palatable. I've thought a lot about it. I've thought about defending it. I've thought about I could be wrong. Anyway, it's kind of taken a bit of the. I was just getting better, and now I feel a bit down. I felt a bit down again because I'm like, well, I don't even know what the point of trying to do this YouTube channel or going back to uni is, or because half of the things I want to do, even though it's not directly related to me, it was all kind of in the same sort of realm of just doing cool stuff with programming and robotics and electronics and stuff. And so for me, it's hard to draw. It's hard to draw a line. So I spent a lot of time. I tried to ignore it, but it's really difficult because all the podcasts I listen to, they talk about it all the time. I feel like maybe at least no, I mean like not I don't mean about viewership. Like I could probably get viewers just fine, but I mean like how do I say? Like I don't know what the so I don't know what it's like in like India or elsewhere, but in America at least, and by extension here, for the most part, I feel like, or at least I guess, or at least I guess maybe it's not really so much per country. It's more like the online spaces that I'm inhabit, like the podcasts I listen to and stuff, um, and the YouTube video channels I watch. They are pretty upset with the route of artificial intelligence at the moment. In particular, they don't like the idea of it taking over creative fields and stuff. And yeah, it's at first it was difficult for me to process because it felt like whenever they talked about AI and stuff, they were talking directly about me. And a lot of things they were saying about like what the industry wants to do and stuff didn't really gel with me. So it felt like a bit of a straw man. It's like, well, that's not what I think. That's not what I believe. That's not why I like this stuff. And I'm also thinking in the back of my head, like I've been I've been reading the paper, watching videos, researching this stuff for years now, and you guys are just reading about it in the news. So you don't have all the information. You don't really know what you're talking about necessarily. But on the other hand, I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm biased. I really love this stuff. I've been researching it for years, so I have a vested interest in a sense, especially since I kind of thought I would be doing some of it, to like be biased towards it and not fully consider all the implications and stuff. And so I've been working through that, trying to figure out, exactly how I feel about everything, what my position is, um, what it means for my career if I manage to get one. It's complicated stuff. I was going to talk about it. Like originally, when I was going to make this before I made it a stream, and I was going to make a video. I was going to talk a bit about it at the beginning before I did the bouncy balls, but in the end, it took a while. About in the week or so it took for me to actually do the live stream, my brain didn't want to talk about it anymore, so I didn't. And instead, I just talked about me trying to make videos in the past. But yeah, eventually, I want to try and do some more complicated projects and stuff, and maybe eventually I'll talk about my opinions on all of this. You know, um, but I'm not sure. It really depends on how confident I'm feeling. Does any of that make sense? I know I'm being a bit vague, but like, you know what I mean? Or am I not making any sense? I'll just wait for your response, assuming you're still watching the video. It's quite a big deal. I see it all over my YouTube page, you know. It's not very I mean, not even not even talking about the podcasts I listen to, um, where, uh, I mean, well, this is a bit risky, but I could show like just some examples. I mean, here's the thing. I don't actually know what a lot of these videos say, because if they weren't shorts and didn't just pop up automatically, a lot of the time I just saw the thumbnail and sort of guessed what the video would be about and sort of gave them the best possible argument in my head, because like I don't want to like straw man them, and just kind of, yeah. Well, all right. Let's All right. Do you mind if I like just temporarily stop the stream for a second and make a new stream so I can talk about this stuff in like the proper category with a proper title? Then I think I'd feel more comfortable talking about it, or at least I would feel better about it. I was going to maybe make a video about it anyway. At least this way I can make a sort of non-combative, very sort of um not that I wanted the video I made eventually to be competitive, but like more fluid video, because it's a live stream, right? Because originally I would have been doing an essay, but if I can just talk about it the way I talk to some of my not really counselors, they're not, what's he called, support workers, kind of like social workers, but yeah. Oh no, this thing here, I don't really trust it. Like it's more this that we're looking at, and these are the actual streams here. Right. One, two, I'm not sure how. I mean, it's just I think it's just delayed because it's showing me it's just showing it's not playing it all the time. I think that's the real thing. Twitch updates to show me whatever the latest thing is. YouTube is buffering it and treating it like a video, so it's loading it slowly and then showing it to me. So when it's loading, it's not actually moving forward like Twitch does. So because of all that buffering, I'm about 18 minutes behind on YouTube. I assume it's the same thing with Restream, where it's not bothering to try and look for the latest thing on interruption. It's waiting for all of the information. So I think the difference is that when there's lag or stuff, or when it's not playing, I think that's the difference, is that Twitch ignores the missing things to keep it up to date, whereas YouTube, at least the YouTube that I'm watching here, at least this thing here, seems to wait for the missing data rather than skipping it and then add it to the stream, which, essentially brings you more behind on the stream over time. What's going on? I honestly have, and I guess Restream does the same. I'm not really sure. All right, so I'll just stop it for the time being. I guess I'll have to title the next video to be like, I guess I'll have to make the next video. Oh, YouTube seems less delayed, I suppose. It's hard for me to tell. It's hard for me to tell, honestly. I guess I'll check that out next time. Anyway, so yeah, I guess I'll just have to make the next part Bouncy Balls Part 3 to actually do the collisions of the bouncy balls and the momentum transfer and stuff. It's going to involve some physics. Hopefully should be fun, should be good. But yeah. All right, so I'll stop the stream for a bit. I'll rename it and I'll start again soon. So I'll see you soon then.